Hi guys, today I'm gonna review The Becoming of Noah Shaw by Michelle Hodkin. I received an arc of this through Edelweiss in exchange for an honest review, and this already came out November 7th. So The Becoming of Noah Shaw is the first book in a new trilogy by Michelle Hodkin called The Shaw Confessions, and it is a companion trilogy to the Mara Dyer trilogy. And you should definitely have read the Mara Dyer trilogy before you go into The Shaw Confessions. The Mara Dyer trilogy is a completed trilogy though, so if you're watching this and you're wanting to check this review out to see if you have to read this book after you finish the Mara Dyer trilogy, you absolutely do not have to. So if you're planning on reading Mara Dyer, but you maybe not sure if you want to go into this trilogy, you don't have to. The Mara Dyer trilogy is an okay end as it is. So The Becoming of Noah Shaw takes place several weeks after the end of the Retribution of Mara Dyer, which is the final book in the Mara Dyer trilogy, and in this one we kind of continue the story from Noah's perspective. Now, I went into this with kind of mixed expectations. I really enjoyed the Mara Dyer trilogy. It was a very solid 4-star trilogy for me, and I only read it this year, I think in April, so I still had the trilogy kind of fresh in my mind, and I was really excited about the Noah Shaw Confessions, but I had heard like mixed things, so I kind of tried to go into it with not too high expectations, but I ended up still being very disappointed. You know, sometimes authors add something to their story or their world, and you can tell that the whole time they've kind of been dying to add this to the story or to the world, and you can tell that they were really not finished with the original trilogy or series, even if it seemed like it. The Becoming of Noah Shaw is not such a book. I feel like there was a lot of potential for this to be very good, because I feel like even though the Mara Dyer trilogy is very good as it is, there are definitely questions left unanswered that I was really hoping this trilogy would tackle, and maybe it will do that in the second and third book. But in the first book, I just thought that nothing was actually answered, and there was a new mystery added to it that I felt like just added a lot of unnecessary drama. That's maybe kind of what the Mara Dyer trilogy was all about, but I felt like there was still enough of it and still enough of the things that were happening in the past that we didn't have to add this whole new drama to it. My biggest problem with this book and the plot that went down in it was just that it was really boring. I feel like at the end of this novel, I kind of looked back at it and I was like, did I really just read a full-length novel of almost 400 pages? Because it certainly does not feel like it at all. The last like 10% or so are really the only time in the novel where it's kind of getting exciting, and then still the kind of twist that happens is not really a twist. It's nothing surprising or shocking. It's something that you were kind of expecting to get revealed way earlier. And really, this just felt like a prologue. And obviously, a first book in a trilogy, you know, should somehow be an introduction. But I feel like so much more should have been added to this, considering that there's already a full trilogy before this. As far as reading the story from Noah's perspective, I think that was fine. I think it's interesting that Hodkin decided to do that, and definitely reading from Noah's perspective and kind of, you know, reading his thoughts is just as you would expect Noah to kind of think. I think he was very true to his character, and also, you know, there's obviously all of the other characters that we see again, like Jamie or Mara's brother, and they all kind of felt very true to what we know of them in Mara Dyer. But I had my problems with Mara's portrayal. Now, this obviously could just be because before we always just knew her from inside of her, or maybe it's especially because we're seeing her from Noah's perspective, and that's maybe just how he sees her. But I don't really think that Mara was kind of the same as she was in the original trilogy. Now, obviously, things happened and she developed as a character, but she didn't feel true to this character. I just didn't really think that she felt like Mara, especially the kind of development throughout this book was just really like, I was frowning a lot at how she developed as a character in this book, and I just don't feel that it was very true to her character. But, you know, obviously that might be something that is very, very subjective. I just kind of couldn't really get into her as a character, even though I found her to be a very interesting character in her own trilogy. Really, the plot is kind of the biggest point as to why I ended up being disappointed by this one. I just was expecting something very different from Michelle Hodkin, and I think she has the ability to do something way more exciting and just better. I read the Mara Dyer trilogy books in just one day. The Becoming of Noah Shaw was just so boring and generic compared to that. Another thing that I noticed that is not really influencing my rating though is that I think Michelle Hodkin kind of missed the opportunity to make this a adult or at least new adult trilogy. I just think the amount of sex that Mara and Noah have, and especially how Michelle Hodkin always really tries to make them like detailed, and they are like a big part of the story, and she really tries to make them like hot and steamy, but then there's only so far you can go in YA. I just don't really think that the story really benefits from that. I think if she would make this trilogy a new adult, then she could go much further, and I think that would really benefit the story because, you know, Noah and Mara's relationship is a lot about sex, and it just feels weird that they are being like really intense about it, and then there comes a part where it has to be cut off. I just don't really think that it works, and I just think in general, also like storytelling wise and just plot wise, that the story really could have benefited from not being YA, and I think it really would have fit into a new adult or adult story. I think that the themes could have been a little bit different, and with that way more interesting. So I guess in the end it does kind of affect my rating, simply because I feel like it would have had maybe a little bit more potential if it actually was not YA. Not to say that YA can't go there, but I think there's just different factors here that kind of lead to me being like, is it a wise decision to keep this YA? Because making a new trilogy is where you have the opportunity to change the kind of age range, and so I was just like, why not go for it? Yeah, obviously the characters are still like 17 or 18, but you know, if the themes are different, then you can change it in my opinion. And one more thing I want to mention is that I personally was very disappointed with the way that Michelle Hodkin decided to talk about trigger warnings. There is a page of trigger warnings in the beginning of the book, which I appreciated, but then she ended up mentioning sex as a trigger and writing, but if you need a trigger warning for that, you're reading the wrong book. I just think it is very disgusting to make kind of fun of it, like to include this page and to make someone think like, oh, that's amazing, I'm so happy you're including a trigger warning page, only then at the end of it to kind of not take it seriously. I think that's a super disgusting move. This is definitely not something that has influenced my rating, but it's something that I find super shitty and super disgusting, and it's definitely making me wonder, you know, how much does Michelle Hodkin actually care about her reader? And it is definitely something that will influence me picking up any of her future books. Now obviously I wasn't the biggest fan of this book, so I'm not like super keen to pick up the sequels in this trilogy, but I'm also thinking, you know, with behaving like that, I'm not really sure if I want to do that and if I want to spend money on an author who's like being shitty, and like call me petty for using that as a argument. But I just think, you know, there's so many good books out there. I don't really need to support authors who are being disgusting like that. There are actual trigger warnings for this one that I will leave in the description so that anybody who is spoiled by trigger warnings won't be spoiled by them. Anyway, these are all of my thoughts on The Becoming of Noah Shaw. Let me know some of your thoughts on this book, and do you plan to read it? I know lots of people are not really wanting to pick up the Shaw Confessions because they just weren't the biggest fan of the final book in the trilogy anyway. But yeah, I would just love to know some of your thoughts if you've read it. Maybe you feel completely different than I do. I feel like it's been a very like either love it or hate it kind of book, and I would love to discuss with you about it. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I guess I'll see you soon. Bye!